Hey everyone, it's Tuesday. Welcome to Tech Tuesday. I have a special guest today, Travis Abrams from UNS. Be right back. Hey everyone, welcome to Tech Tuesday. I'm Rick Yuzzi with ZCorum, and with me is Travis Abrams from UNS. Travis, how you doing?
I'm great, Rick. How are you doing today?
I'm doing really well. So our message today, or basically what we're going to be talking about, is penetration testing. So we're going to go through through some slides that you've got on that. I think some really good stuff to let people know what that is, why it's important, how they might be vulnerable. So a lot of information that you can get. So let me start off by saying I've got technical issues with presenting questions on the screen so our viewers can see them, but I can see them. So if you have any questions as we're going through this, you can type them in YouTube chat, and I will see those, and I'll stop Travis at some point if it's relevant to what he's saying, or maybe at some point or at the end. We'll try to cover everything that we see there. Or if you're watching later, if you're not watching live and you have a question, just go ahead and type it in the YouTube comments, and then I'll see that later, and I can get that over to Travis if I can't answer it, and we can get you an answer right there through YouTube chat. So we'll take care of that. Also, I wanted to let you know before we get started. Actually, Travis, before we get started, let me go ahead and let you kind of introduce yourself as well and kind of give us your background. So.
Yeah, thanks, Rick. I'm excited to talk about this topic. I mean, this is a great topic around penetration testing and helping organizations identify their vulnerabilities. My background is about 26 years in cybersecurity. Been doing this for a long time. When I started, I had brown hair and didn't need glasses. So I've been doing this a long time. Really, all I focus on is cybersecurity. So I'm excited to talk about it today.
That's great. And also, I wanted to let you know, we can help you if you're looking at, cybersecurity services. That I was going to show you that where you can go there. So we've got our website here. So if you go to ZCorum.com, and you'll see right under there, first thing under products, you'll see cybersecurity, or we call it cybersecurity, just a little play on our name. And you'll see everything that we offer on that site, different kinds of things, including penetration testing if you need help with that. And this is all through our partner, Travis, and UNS. So everything that you hear from him today, you'll be getting his expertise and knowledge as you work with us. So you'll see what we offer there. There's a lot of good resources up there as well. So I just wanted to make sure everybody was aware of that. So Travis, I have now got your screen up there, so I'm going to let you kick off.
Great. Thanks again, Rick. Just a little recap. We do hundreds of pen tests a year for clients. So we tend to find very common vulnerabilities that we see across numerous clients. And today, what I wanted to cover was first, what is a pen test, right? Let's make sure we level set on what that is, why you need to do them, what makes up a good pen test, and then what are some of the common findings that we see across customers of all sizes. And we'll also walk you through a few recommendations that you can do to help secure your environment against these common vulnerabilities and findings. So first, let's talk a little bit about what is a pen test. Essentially, from our perspective, it is a controlled cyber attack. So when you're having a penetration test, you are essentially mimicking the techniques and the tactics by the attackers. It is more than just a vulnerability scan. It is more than an automated, scenario you run with software that has to be performed manually with combination of software to really qualify as a pen test. By mimicking the tactics of the bad guys, a client should have a really good understanding of what their security weaknesses are, how well their defenses are holding up, and really just get an overall idea of how resilient their network is, to cyber threats. The major cyber threats we see, of course, ransomware. That's really the big one. Business email compromise, fraud, different things like that. But ransomware is probably the item most people worry about. And so we'll talk a little bit about some of those tactics and techniques that they use.
And now, a quick question. So, obviously there's a lot of advancements on both sides, but including those that are doing the hacking. So I guess if you're doing the penetration testing and you're saying like you're mimicking what a hacker would do, you're having to keep up to speed with what their latest tactics are, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you're not, then you're really not providing the right value, for your clients. And one of the ways we do that is we have a whole security operations team that does nothing but monitor client networks, help manage security for clients. They're dealing with attacks all day long. They're dealing with compromises, different things. So we take that information from that team to understand what are the attacks that they're seeing, what's really happening, and then we figure out how to mimic those and how do we perform those same attacks for our clients in a controlled manner so that they're able to test against real world scenarios. Then of course, a lot of reading, a lot of staying on top of, new threats and new vulnerabilities, but that's one of the ways we do that.
Thanks.
Now, how often and why should you have a penetration test done? First one, and probably the most obvious, is going to be compliance. So if you were following any of the security frameworks, be it PCI, HIPAA, or if you're even using NIST cybersecurity framework, if you're working towards BEAD funding, any of those items, every one of those security frameworks calls out regular security testing and penetration testing. So just by point of doing the pen test, you're going to help meet your compliance requirements. Also, you need to look at contracts that you've signed. If you have any kind of contracts with other businesses, generally would be a B2B, they may have requirements around regular security testing that you may have to provide that partner with proof that you're doing that. So compliance is going to be probably the more common reason to do that. But we're also seeing cyber insurance. More and more cyber insurance carriers and policies are asking clients to have pen tests performed. And we've seen a few scenarios where they required it in order to, say, get the renewal or maybe get the best price and the best level of coverage. They want to make sure that you are regularly testing your environment to make sure you're not vulnerable or you're reducing your risk as much as possible. We've also had clients tell us that being able to provide our attestation letters and our reports to their carrier streamlined their entire cyber insurance process.
Oh, no. I think I lost Travis. Let me bring him back.
Do that.
Hey, Travis. I think we just lost you on the stream for just a brief moment. So I think I've got you back. You were saying how you helped streamline some insurance, I guess, that people were getting.
Yes. So by taking the reports from the penetration test, you can often provide that or an attestation letter, kind of a one-pager showing you had the test performed to your cyber insurance carrier. And that will often allow you to get more favorable terms or at least streamline the entire process because they're more confident that you're taking cybersecurity seriously and doing due diligence and making sure you're following best practices.
Yeah. So is it just by default that a pen test should be something you should do at the start of maybe implementing a cybersecurity plan because you need to know what's vulnerable? Would that be a fair statement?
Yeah, it absolutely. If you're relatively newer to, say, maybe developing an entire cyber plan, one of the first things you need to have an understanding of is where your risk is. And there's multiple ways and different ways to perform risk assessments. Some are technical risk assessments like a penetration test, vulnerability assessments. Others are non-technical where you're looking at more procedures and processes. But it should absolutely be one of the first things you do because you have to understand where your gaps are. And that's what's going to help drive your implementation of technologies and processes and things of that nature. How do you know where to invest if you don't understand where your risk is?
Right.
The last reason that I like to cover when talking about, why you should do a penetration test is one, it's because you should. It's the responsible thing to do. If you have customers, partners in any way, they expect you to perform cybersecurity. Whether you have told them you do it or not, whether you've signed a contract, I guarantee you that if you were to ask your customers what their expectations of you are around cybersecurity, they have them. So they are expecting you to follow security standards. They're expecting you to protect their PII, the information they give you. If you're providing, say, broadband services to businesses, they expect that you're going to take responsible actions to protect your network so that you can continue to provide that broadband service so they can service their customers, right? So there's a whole chain of effect there. And so really at this day and age, with the number of attacks we see, with everything going on, it's really just the right thing to do. So we highly recommend, even if it's not under a compliance mandate, you should be considering performing regular penetration testing just to make sure you're providing the best service possible to your customers.
And when people hear, if they're hearing about cybersecurity mandates, a lot of times you hear about supply chain. That's what they're talking about, right?
That's one of them, yeah. So if you look at like the NIST cybersecurity framework, that has supply chain security requirements. And so, you have partners, you have customers, you have all of these third-party applications that have to perform together in order for you to provide that service to your client. All of that needs to be tested, because if one area breaks down, it could impact the entire, service that you provide. So being able to test all of that regularly, is really important.
Mm-hmm.
So frequency, at a minimum, we recommend at least once a year performing a full penetration test. And this would be internal, external, human factors. We'll go talk more about that, but at least once a year. That is really kind of the standard. Now, some organizations are moving more towards a continuous penetration testing. And that's something we provide for clients as well, where you perform an initial penetration test, and then you're continually testing certain aspects of that throughout the year. So new vulnerabilities pop up, new attack methods and techniques that are being used by ransomware actors. And then we're continually testing that to make sure that you're secure, that your security controls are functioning as they're expected to, and also that you're remediating things. So one of the big parts is when you get a pen test, you need to fix everything identified, and then you need to validate that. Like, how do you know for sure it's been remediated?
Mm-hmm.
So at a minimum once a year. Again, some clients are moving more towards almost a continuous model, but also whenever there's a significant change. So if you are, say, migrating from an on-premises data center to the cloud, you should test that cloud environment, right? That should be tested to make sure the configurations are secure, to make sure it's configured the way you want, the alerting is enabled, the proper levels of security are there. Same thing, merger, acquisitions, things of that nature. So really, whenever there's a significant change to your infrastructure, that should be tested. It doesn't need to be a full penetration test, right? In that scenario, you can test specific items, specific scenarios, just to make sure that they're secure and functioning the way you expect them to. We've all been in IT for a long time, and I'm sure many of you have been on a project where the project starts out great and maybe there's a time crunch. So what happens? People don't document things. Maybe they reuse a password because it's quick and easy to allow for migration. And then oftentimes those items don't get fixed on the back end, right? So again, testing after big projects and things of that nature is really important to identify potential misconfigurations and vulnerabilities. So what makes up a good pen test? There are a lot of penetration testing providers. They're not all created equal. And so we tried to cover, some of the 5 top areas we feel should be focused on and are really what make up a good pen test. And the first one is it has to be comprehensive. So the penetration test needs to cover your network, your systems, applications, and most importantly, human factors. And especially if you haven't done one before, you need to test everything, because you got to have a really good understanding of where your potential risk lies, and how to manage that. Some customers now will maybe not want to do phishing or some of those factors because they feel like they have a tool in place that tests it periodically. Unfortunately, what we've seen is that when we do those tests, we often still gain access to the network, because a lot of these automated tools that customers use for like phishing simulations, things like that, they tend to get identifiable over time, right? The templates kind of, you can tell, or people are just ignoring them. And then when you send a very targeted phishing attack against a client, it often is still successful. So we still recommend regular testing around phishing, SMS attacks, and we'll talk more about that as well. The next item is it has to cover real world attack simulations. So kind of what we mentioned earlier. So you need to talk to your provider and ask them, try to get an understanding. What type of tests are they running? Are they just installing software and then running scripts? Or are they using manual techniques? Are they emulating the techniques and tactics used by ransomware gangs? And if they say they are, what are those tactics? So what are some of the things they're performing that are relevant to today's scenarios? We had a client that we did a pen test for. The previous provider did not find any vulnerabilities. We went in, they were probably the most secure network we've ever seen, but even then we uncovered numerous potential vulnerabilities. And the feedback from them was that once the automated tools stopped working, the previous provider just said, well, you're good, there's no vulnerabilities, but there were. So you have to make sure that the testers are skilled and that they're using real world simulations. Also, actionable insights. So every finding in a report should have clear remediation steps, not just a list of findings. It's surprising to us how often we have customers ask us about this because they've had bad responses before or bad outcomes. Every finding should have a clear what it is, where it was found, how it was found. So we like to provide screenshots and very clear steps of how we uncovered and exploited a vulnerability. This could include the tools we use, the techniques we used. All of that should be very open and shared with you when you're looking at this. So what I would suggest is ask for a sample report from your provider and make sure that it is more than just coming from automated tools. So you want to make sure there's a little bit of manual work going on there, so that you're getting the right level of test. And often you can tell that just by looking at the reports. Most penetration test reports will highlight the negative, right? So they will obviously show you areas of improvement, vulnerabilities, things like that. We like to also include positive findings. So what we call positive observations. Many customers have invested in cybersecurity. They have spent money on training, on software, hardware, services. And by showing positive observations, it can help you go back to your management team and show that, hey, look, the controls we implemented are working. The services we purchased, they're doing their jobs. So if a client detects us during the pen test, we love to call that out. If there are things that were blocked from doing, common attacks that we know were there, but we were prevented, we love to add those to the report as well, so that not only does the client have the areas of improvement, but they also have a positive outcomes that they can, again, then share with their internal teams. So we feel like positive findings is really important, because this is what's going to help you validate and prove that, our investments are making sense. The things we're doing are working, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and that's important. Nobody wants to be beat down totally, unless they deserve it, right? But so
most, I'll just say, most tests we do, we can find something positive. Now, there's been a few where it's been a struggle to find a positive finding, but there's always something there.
Yeah, and that may be, I guess, you might have a person in IT, for example, that's not happy about the fact that they're having somebody do this, and if you can point out that they've done some things right, that's probably good, right?
Absolutely, it is. And again, it just shows, it just helps organizations highlight what's going right, because many are. There's always going to be something negative to find in a pen test. We've never had a test where there was no outcome, nothing that needed to be fixed. But being able to highlight the positive just really goes a long way in helping to motivate people, make people feel great about the work they're doing, but also show the value.
Yep.
Yeah. And then retesting. We don't include retesting by default on our tests, but we like to call this out as an option. Some customers, especially.
Looks like I lost Travis again. My apologies, folks. I don't know why this streaming software sometimes.
You may need to show that you have remediated the findings. So for retesting, we generally recommend testing of criticals and highs, and only if you need to show remediation. So for some customers, they don't necessarily need retesting. We've also seen wide pricing variations for retesting. We generally say it's between 15 to 20% of the initial cost of the test. We have seen providers charge the full amount for a retest. We don't recommend doing that because really a retest should only be testing specific items to ensure they were correctly fixed. So keep an eye out.
I lost you again for a second there, but I don't think we missed very much. I don't know. It could be a connection on my side or yours where I'm losing you for just a second. So, so a question on you talk about here on human factors. So that is important because people, I think, are probably one of the biggest weaknesses. They're probably the least predictable thing on the network, especially as you add employees, those kinds of things. So, and you mentioned, sometimes some of these automated things can look very automated, but I'm assuming that that's changing where artificial intelligence I'm assuming it's going to make some of these phishing emails and other things look even more real than ever, and maybe that's kind of scary to me, right?
Well, and that's why we suggest that you still test periodically, even if you're doing your own internal phishing simulations, because the techniques that can be used now that can combine top-notch video, audio, so you can impersonate someone just from a few seconds of their voice by using AI to generate their voice. And the email capabilities that are being generated by AI are just top-notch. And the bad guys are using all the same things, right? So if people are out there using ChatGPT or Gemini or Grok or whatever, I guarantee you, we know for a fact the bad guys are using it too. So AI can be powerful on the defense, but it's also making the offense very good for the attackers as well.
Yep. All right. Let me remind everybody that go ahead and subscribe to our channel if you're not subscribed. Give us a like if you like this video. Appreciate that. And if you're watching live, this is your time now to ask any questions that you have that can be addressed by Travis during this broadcast. So I encourage you to do that. Thanks, Travis. You can go on.
Yep. All right, so let's talk about some of the key observations and trends that we see. So what I'm going to talk about will be a little more technical in this part, but I'm going to talk a little bit about the techniques that we see attackers doing that we're also doing as pen testers. And one of those first things is what we call living off the land. So in the past, attackers would gain access to a machine and they would download their own files. They would download their own, software, executables, their viruses, things like that. And that is pretty much doesn't happen much nowadays. That's kind of an early 2000s thing. So what the attackers do now is they're using built-in tools, mainly in Windows, and using those to perform attacks and reconnaissance on the network before they would then download, say, their ransomware executables. And they're doing that so that they can avoid detection. And so they're using PowerShell. They're using built-in executables on the Windows systems to test the network, to look around. A very common example is if an attacker gains access to the machine, one of the first things they're going to do is open a command prompt, and they're going to start typing in commands. And they're going to, within a few minutes, they can know where all your domain controllers are, who's an admin in your network, what rights they have. And then from there, they just start targeting and moving laterally through the network. So the days of, downloading a vulnerability scanner and just running it on the whole network, that just doesn't happen anymore. And so as pen testers, this is the type of techniques we perform when we first start an assessment. We're not going to just download Nessus and kick off a vulnerability scan. That's not going to happen in the real world. What the attackers are going to do is they're going to run different attacks, which we'll talk about. They're going to gain access to a machine, and they're going to do these type of techniques to move laterally to gain access to other systems before then executing, say, a ransomware attack. So we want to perform the same type of attacks because you need to be able to detect that. And so if you're not detecting this activity, that means you would not detect that if a real attacker performed it as well. Another common attack vector that we see, and this one is happening as we speak. We had a client just last week that was compromised by this, and it's called the attacker in the middle. And in this attack, an attacker will send an SMS message or an email, but SMS works really well with a link. And in that link, it will generally go to legitimate Office 365 login page. So this is not a separate phishing page that's fake. This is the real Microsoft website. So the URL is going to be right. The SSL is going to be correct, but you're going through a reverse proxy. So when you log in to the page, you're going to log in with your username and password. The attacker is going to capture that. More importantly, when you log in with your MFA, they're also going to capture your session cookie after you're logged in. And then once they have that session cookie, they can simply paste that into the browser, and they now have full access to your Office 365 environment. So this attack will bypass your MFA that most people are implementing now for email. And again, this is something that we're seeing happen, every day. We just had a client last week who user was tricked into logging into the site. Within minutes of them having access, they sent out 3,000 emails to different people, partners, clients, everything. So they'll gain access to the mailbox, they'll add rules, things like that. Now that is the easy attack. The more scary one is when the attackers do not send out email, but they now have access to a client's OneDrive, SharePoint. Any site that person has access to, they essentially can gain access to and download data. During pen tests, we have found numerous passwords, encryption keys, all kinds of things that are kept inside of a person's OneDrive or on different SharePoint sites that they had access to. So this attack can not only lead to a business email compromise, but it can lead to a loss of data. We had one test we were asked to perform where they wanted us to see if we could gain access to their corporate banking site. We were targeting accounting individuals. We used an SMS message with a phone call, was able to log into the person's OneDrive. One thing we have found is that OneNote seems to have become the default password manager for too many people. And inside of OneNote were all the credentials, including those for the corporate banking, which we were able to access. So this is a very dangerous attack. And this is one reason why we highly suggest still testing the human factor. Because just because that person didn't click on the phishing page, for Dropbox does not mean they're not going to click on one for this attack. And these attacks are highly successful.
Now, when you're doing the pen testing and you find something like this or you find other things, do you occasionally run into something where it's like, not only do you find that there's a vulnerability, but you can see that it's already been attacked or somebody's making use of it?
We have found that a few times. Yes, we've been a couple of times. We've been inside of doing an internal penetration test, for example, and we found that there were already what we would consider attack tools on a server. We of course stopped what we were doing, notified the client. Turned out it was okay. They kind of knew about it, but that can definitely happen. Sometimes we will also deploy honeypots, and that's something we can do as part of an assessment where we can deploy honeypots on the network. And so we can test for current compromises. And there have been situations where clients have been under attack and it wasn't us, right? And so part of our process is we will work closely with the client to make sure they have points of contact, how to reach us, clear lines of communication. So when they see attacks, they can ask us, hey, is this you guys? And we'll be able to say yes or no. And there have been scenarios where it wasn't us, unfortunately.
So honeypot, just for everybody's benefit there, that's where you set something up that's going to be very attractive that an attacker will see, and then you're basically drawing them in so you can see what they're doing. Is that right?
Exactly. Yeah. It's generally emulates like a vulnerable system, some kind of server, something like that. And it's literally designed to be interacted with. So as soon as an attacker sees it and they perform any kind of interaction with it, everything from a port scan to trying to log in, it generates an alert because it's not a legitimate system. No legitimate user should be accessing it, right? So this is a very quick and easy way to add internal threat detection capabilities, for clients. And so that's something we do sometimes as well as part of the pen test. Active Directory, for those of you that are running, internal Active Directory, that is probably one of the most vulnerable applications we've seen over the years. If you think about it, Active Directory is one of those technologies that has probably been in place for 10 years or 20 years. It's been upgraded numerous times, managed by different people. And over time, it just becomes very big and no one really understands how it's configured. And one of the biggest issues is the Active Directory certificate services. This is an add-on that has to be manually installed. And once that's installed, it allows an organization to issue different types of certificates. That can be a SSL web certificate or a machine certificate, whatever that is. The problem is, out of the box, the Active Directory certificate services has no fewer than 3 major vulnerabilities that can allow an attacker to gain almost immediate access to the network. This is done by basically compromising and being able to issue Kerberos tickets on the network. And once an attacker is able to issue a Kerberos ticket, they can basically issue it for anybody in the company. They have full access to the network at that point. So if you have Active Directory internally, definitely find out if you have Active Directory certificate services. If you don't need it, turn it off. If you do need it, definitely want to secure that better. It is an actively exploited vulnerability by ransomware gangs. I can tell you, for example, the Akira ransomware group, which is one of the more prolific ones, they utilize this. So if they gain access to the network, one of the first things they will do is check for the existence of Active Directory certificate services. If it's there, they will attempt to exploit it. And if they are able to do that, they essentially, again, have full control of the network at that point. We have seen with Akira, we've seen them exploit this, and within a day, they've already encrypted the network. So it happened very fast. So Active Directory is something all clients should be heavily focused on, securing and making sure that you're, really hardening that environment. Another common one is the man in the middle. This again is something related to Microsoft. Whether you know it or not, IPv6 is enabled on all of your Windows devices. That is turned on by default, and there is an attack that allows an attacker, if they gain access to a system, they can essentially become an IPv6 DNS server, and from there they can relay traffic. So what that means is they can monitor authentications on the network and see traffic as it goes, and they could essentially relay traffic from one machine to, say, create a computer account within Active Directory, for example. That's a very common attack. Once that computer account is created in Active Directory, a computer is the same as a user. So if I can create a computer account on your network, I can now perform all kinds of attacks and analysis of the network, the same as if I did a user. So this attack is very common as well. The ADCS one, or the Active Directory, is probably the first thing an attacker is going to check. And if not, they can't do that. They're definitely going to be looking at doing an attack like this, because once again, they're able to relay that traffic. They can create a computer account and now have access to the Active Directory system. We already talked about Active Directory, so I won't spend much time on this, but there are numerous vulnerabilities within AD, so definitely recommend, again, spending some time to focus on the misconfigurations. We have some recommendations you can take. We'll show that in a minute, how you can help protect yourself against some of these man-in-the-middle attacks and different attacks that we're discussing. And default passwords, you would think that this would not be as common as it is. But as a pen tester, we just frequently encounter systems with default credentials. A lot of times it'll be printers, switches, wireless network devices, cameras, things like that will have default passwords. And the biggest issue with that is often devices, especially printers and other like network switches as well, may be integrated with third-party services. So if you, for example, integrate a printer with Active Directory so that you could, say, save files to a network share, or maybe with email so you can scan something in and email it out, it is trivial to dump that username and password from a device if it has a default password. The fastest path to domain admin that we have ever taken was 5 minutes of starting an assessment, and it was through a printer. And through that attack, we were able to basically dump the service account, and that service account had admin privileges. And from there, we were able to escalate to domain admin, all because the printer had a default password, right? So sometimes it's not fancy, complicated attacks. Sometimes it's as simple as a default password. So that's something you want to test for and check. And also looking at scripts and things like that could contain those passwords as well.
So you would think the equipment manufacturers have some responsibility here, that they would not be doing this anymore, but I guess they still do this?
It has gotten better, where sometimes now some of the HP or Xerox printers, things like that, will force you to set up a default password or a unique password. But it not always the case. And even recently, I think just maybe a week or two ago, there were quite a few vulnerabilities released for Konica multifunction printers that could lead to full compromise of devices, some of which could not be patched. So they can't even be fixed. So printers, people don't think about them, but printers and network devices are still very important to secure in your environment and can definitely lead to a compromise of your network.
And what about Internet of Things, with more of those being on the network?
Yeah, cameras, all kinds of devices like that. We see that all the time, where, again, people are just putting them in. Oftentimes, it's not IT that may even be buying some of these items, or the security team, or maybe a security person's not even told. We were just talking to a client 2 days ago that was telling us how some other team in their company purchased a bunch of cameras to put them in, and they just found out about it after they'd been implemented, so they didn't even know. So it's so easy now for even an end user in your company to come and plug in something. Maybe they want a router or something for more internet, or some kind of storage device so they can save files. It's so easy for anyone to plug something in now to the network and interact with it. And often IT doesn't even know.
So, and when you guys are doing the penetration testing, do you get down to the user level as far as passwords they might have? Because a lot of people, they say they're 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 is a password. And
we will sometimes, because one of the big tactics that we will attempt to do is to capture password hashes. And so while we're, say, sniffing the network and looking at the network, and there's different types of attacks you can do that will reveal a person's password hash. Once we have that password hash, we'll attempt to crack those using password crackers. And often we are finding, service accounts that have admin rights with very simple passwords, as well as regular users as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I don't know if it's related to this particular topic, but we do have a question. Well, one question is this related to cybersecurity? Yeah, absolutely. Yes, that's what we're talking about here. But somebody asks, what about XBOW AI? XBOW AI? Have you heard of that?
I haven't heard of that one.
I guess it's some kind of artificial intelligence, but I'm not sure what it is.
Yeah, and there's so many of those, and there is even specific large language models that bad guys have written, right? So there was like an evil GPT tool you can download.
Yeah.
But now with ChatGPT and some of these other tools and their abilities to write code, for example, you can write code so fast and very accurately to create, attack scripts, or, if we need to create a little application to relay something or to capture some data, often we can do that, fully automated with the AI tools. But I'll look into that one as well.
Yeah.
One of the last areas is open file shares. This kind of goes along with the passwords because, often we will find passwords either saved in spreadsheets or often embedded into scripts inside of network shares. So we've also been able to find backups inside of file shares, where maybe there was a place where VMs were stored, or they were being backed up on a SAN, something like that. And so we can often gain access to those VM images, and those are like zip files. So you can literally unzip them and oftentimes get access to hashes and different types of passwords and things like that. So not only do you want to make sure you're using strong passwords, but file shares, you want to test your network, make sure you understand, what file shares are out there, what data is living on these file shares. Because what we'll generally attempt to do is, once we gain an account, or even without an account, we'll start scanning every document and file on the share. I'm looking for certain keywords, right? And in almost every environment, we will find passwords, spreadsheets with passwords, things of that nature. All right, so what can you do? So we've kind of went through all of this, and hopefully I didn't go too fast, Rick. But there's some things you can do today to help secure your environment. First, have a pen test, right? I mean, definitely have one performed. Especially if you haven't, you need to. If it's been a while, you want to do that again every year. We recommend having multi-factor authentication everywhere. Even though we talked a little bit about some of the attacks against that with Microsoft, those can be fixed, but MFA should be enabled everywhere. All internal servers, applications. I mean, if people go to the bathroom, they should have to put in MFA code, right, to get in the door. Yeah. Everywhere. And there's a couple reasons for that. The obvious one is, well, it prevents you from logging in if you don't have the password. But the other area is it's an excellent early warning system. So if you have MFA configured when someone logs into a server and that person is sitting there and they get a prompt to log into the server and they didn't do it, well, now there's a problem. So often MFA could be utilized as well as a little bit of an early warning system if it's deployed everywhere on the network. So again, would recommend deploying MFA everywhere. Virtual systems, like if you're using virtualization in your network, make sure you have MFA on the hypervisors and do not integrate those with AD. We have seen attackers take over all the virtual systems that way. So you want to use that. Also, strong password. Now, if you have MFA everywhere for your users, they may not need as strong of a password, but service accounts, things like that should have super strong passwords that are resistant to cracking. And then those passwords need to be stored in a password vault. Nowadays, you can buy password vaults that are very inexpensive. 1Password. There's a bunch of them. There's some free open source ones that are really good as well. We had one client that they used the free KeyPass, and they installed it on every single machine in their company. And they told the users, you can store all your passwords in your KeyPass. You're responsible for it, but that's where all your passwords need to go. The reality is every one of your users has dozens of passwords they probably have to remember. And just expecting them to remember them or not write them down somewhere, it's not realistic. We find too many passwords in OneNote and things like that. So we see this all the time. So get a free password vault or a low-cost one for your organization. Ensure that IT is using it for all of the service accounts, things like that. And also make sure your end users are using them as well.
Something I don't think a lot of people realize about passwords these days is how quickly a brute force attack, let's say, or what you can do, what a hacker can do today. You used to think, 6 characters, a number here and there, that might be sufficient. But what's the state these days with passwords?
Yeah, I mean that's going to be cracked fast. Now, there's been some recent, pushback a little bit from like NIST and others that have said, hey, maybe we don't need 30 character passwords anymore. Maybe 10 characters is enough. Things like that. And that's okay, but that's also assuming you have MFA everywhere, right? If you're not using multi-factor authentication on all your systems, you need to have strong passwords that are rotated frequently, right? Now, some of the guidance now has even said, don't rotate your passwords as frequently, because by doing that, you're actually encouraging users to make simple passwords. Like they'll add the number 1 to the end of the password, and number 2, the number 3, things like that.
Yeah.
So maybe you don't rotate them as often, but again, you've got to have the multi-factor authentication in place. So if you don't have that, you probably need to have stronger passwords. Yeah. Also, I'll mention this too, Rick, because you mentioned about the passwords, but the dark web. One of the things we do when we perform a penetration test is we will do a dark web search for that client's email domain. And the goal of that is to uncover passwords that have been compromised and are available on the dark web. So often your people in your company are using their username and password for legitimate work-related sites. These are other third-party sites or services they may be using. Those can be compromised. And when those are compromised, those passwords can end up being available. Or maybe users are using their corporate email for, personal sites as well. That happens a lot too. And so when those passwords are compromised, they often end up on sites on the dark web. So we'll search for those. And if we find any that are within 90 days, of being found, we'll attempt to use those username and passwords to gain access to the network. About 20% of the time when we find some, they still work. So we have used dark web findings to log in externally to networks and services, during pen tests. The scary thing about that is if we found it, then lots of other people have it too, right? One had been on the dark web for at least 6 months when we found it and logged in with it. So there's no telling if it had been used before, no evidence that it was, but that could have easily been a bad situation for the client. Yeah. The last recommendation, this one's a little bit more techie. This is specifically to Active Directory. There is a setting you can change in Active Directory, this machine account quota. You want to set that to 0. What this does is it prevents regular users from being able to create machine accounts. So most people don't realize this, but any user in Active Directory does not have to be an admin, just a standard user, can create up to 10 machine accounts in Active Directory. There's literally no legitimate reason for a user to do that. And that's one of the things that's taken advantage of by the attackers. So we mentioned earlier, like the man-in-the-middle attack, and some of those different attacks will be used to create computer account. So by setting this to 0, that attack won't work. They won't be able to create that initial computer account. So it can slow them down. It can block them from being able to use that method to attack the network. So this is a super simple change to make if you have Active Directory. That could be a big help to you. Okay. And at that, what we try to do is to help our clients be unstoppable. So we love opportunity to talk to any of you if you need any, penetration testing or other services. That's what we're here for.
Fantastic. And as I mentioned, folks can go to ZCorum.com and just go up there to the top. Again, just go up to where you see products, go to cybersecurity, and you will see information there, and you can reach out and contact us. And again, with our expert partner here, Travis and UNS, we can help you with that. So, penetration testing, that's something obviously we can offer, but you're talking about kind of continuous penetration testing, but there are other services that people can get, I guess, because as I'm listening to this, I'm thinking, wow, there's lots of opportunities even in between penetration testing where somebody can go in, somebody brings up a server or, again, a new employee, that kind of thing. So something else that people really need to implement would be monitoring those kinds of things. So I want to make people aware that there are services like Security Operations Center as a service where they don't need to set everything up, but they can have, your team basically keeping tabs on their network 24/7, right? Where, you do the penetration test, you figure out where the vulnerabilities are, you get those things fixed, and then you are watching for anything else that comes in whenever it does, any kind of change in behavior with what looks like it's a user and it's not. Kind of explain some of that.
Yeah, so like I mentioned earlier about how we take data from the attacks we see, we use that to help drive our penetration testing. We also do the reverse. So when we are able to compromise a network or bypass, an endpoint security or something like that, we take that information back to our security operations team, and they figure out ways to build detection capabilities around that. Mm-hmm. So not only can we help, identify the vulnerabilities, but because of the way we provide these services, we're continually updating our detection capabilities as well. And so this allows us to, help clients monitor their endpoint security, their network security, whatever that looks like. There's different variables depending on the client, but we can help protect that network as well. And then we're continually monitoring, managing, and updating that content to stay relevant so that when the latest attacks come out, you'll be covered against that.
Fantastic. And that's provided as a service. So again, this is going to be a lot more cost effective than somebody setting up all of their own equipment, and then also the staffing to kind of manage all of that. So thanks, Travis. This was very educational. Hopefully it was for you folks as well. You see there, if you go on YouTube, click subscribe if you found our channel helpful. If you like the video, give us a thumbs up on that. If you do subscribe, click the little bell, and you'll be notified whenever I'm live with any kind of content. I do videos on broadband news, those kinds of things. Actually, next week on Tuesday, I believe it's the afternoon, I'll send out an email to folks that might be interested, but we are going to be doing something on virtual carrier grade NAT. So for those of you that are kind of struggling with IPv4, especially if you're going to be growing your network and you've been buying IPv4 addresses, there's a better solution there, and that would be virtual CGNAT. It's a software-based solution where you don't need specific hardware. I just lost Travis again. I don't have his... We're almost done, which is not bad, but there he is. Let me get you back. There you are again. Travis, I lost you again there. I don't know why. Your picture suddenly was gone. Now your voice is gone.
I heard you stop talking a little bit there for a few seconds.
Yeah, okay. So we must have just a little... I don't know if it's on my end or yours, but I think if there's any kind of blip, maybe you get cut off. But then you're right back, which is good. I was a little worried there for a minute, but... Thanks again for very informative discussion on this. So again, if anybody's interested in penetration test reach out to us. Go to ZCorum.com. You can do ZCorum.com/cybersecurity, or just look for cybersecurity in the menu and you will find us. Again, I appreciate your watching. Thank you for doing that. Thank you, Travis. And I will see everybody next time I'm live. And again, I'll probably be live between now and Tuesday at some point, just at some point. But if I'm not, it'll be next Tuesday in the afternoon. I'll be doing Tech Tuesday on virtual carrier grade NAT. So if you weren't interested in that, just go ahead and subscribe and you will get a notification. Thanks again. I'll see everybody next time. Bye-bye.